Hey guys, it's Sandro here, and welcome to part 2 and the paint correction stage of the detail on this new Hyundai Elantra. So let's remove these holograms. For a starting point to discover what machine, compound, pad and technique is going to remove them, I'm using my ShineMate 62015 polisher with a Lake Country SDO foam pad and Shine Supply Classic polish. So this is a very gentle or non-aggressive combination, which is always the best place to start, as I have no idea how hard this paint is and I don't want to remove more clear coat than is necessary. I'm just adding a few small drops of product to my pad, doing 3 passes in a ½ meter square section with a mid-machine speed and using a slow arm movement with moderate to light pressure. I've left the footage running in real time for this first set, so you guys can see the whole polishing set from start to finish as a reference. So for me, this is a general or standard polishing method and technique. Now I can certainly deviate from this method, sometimes decreasing the amount of compound, using a slower machine speed and faster arm movement if I want to increase the finishing abilities of my polishing set. Or other times I'll do the opposite and use a little more compound, higher machine speed, more pressure, a slower arm movement, and even working a smaller section if I want to increase the cutting ability of my polishing set. So there's certainly things I can do to alter the outcome and my results of any pad and compound combination, but also understand that these are just slight incremental changes, as going too far or extreme one way or the other, or deviating too much from this standard technique usually doesn't end up working all that well for me. I'll also blow out my pad with compressed air after every polishing set and use an IPA wipe to remove any polishing oils before inspecting my results with some good lighting. Now having a look at the results, hopefully you guys can see that the actual 3D hologram effect is gone, as is most of the haze, which has additionally amplified the gloss. However, much of the deeper compounding or rotary swirls haven't been removed. So holograms themselves are super easy to remove. All it takes is a gentle approach with a good combination and technique. But unfortunately, the rest of the more aggressive rotary compounding swirls and scratches that were created at the same time as the holograms are going to require something with a little more cut in order to remove them. I'd also say that based on this first test, that this probably isn't a soft paint, as I was able to finish perfectly with such ease, but yet not remove the larger portion of the compounding swirls, which is pretty much a characteristic of a harder paint. I performed the second test section still using classic polish, as it seemed to finish perfectly on this paint, but this time stepped up to the light cutting blue HDO foam pad to hopefully get a little more cut out of it. I also just very slightly increased my machine speed and added a touch more pressure to hopefully help increase its defect removal. So as mentioned earlier, I'm making just slight incremental changes and responding to the results that I saw in my first test section to chase a little more cut in this second test section and not going too extreme or deviating too far from my original standard technique. I've said it many times before and I'll say it again, that using detailing products and equipment is the easy part of detailing. It just takes a little practice. The harder part of detailing and what's really going to make you good at this craft, as well as elevate your skills, is knowing how to read your results and respond to them. Also, don't disregard the huge advantage of using a good handheld defect spotting light, as you can't correct what you can't see. Now this was definitely an improvement over the first test section, being able to remove more of the compounding swirls and still finish quite perfectly. So this would once again suggest that this paint isn't particularly soft, but at least a mid, if not harder paint. But in any case, although it may be hard to see in the footage, there was still a few too many swirls and scratches in the finish to my liking. And although I'm certainly not going for perfection on this job due to time constraints, it was still not to a standard that I'd be happy with. For a third test section, I once again stuck with classic polish, as at this stage I know it's finishing perfectly on the paint. But this time I used it with the Lake Country microfiber polishing pad, which really should quite significantly increase its cutting or defect removal ability. I primed my pad with the polish, as microfiber pads don't tend to self-prime as well as foam pads, and just eased off the pressure as microfiber pads do tend to create a little more heat, which can be addressed by using less pressure and also moving a little quicker with your arm speed. Microfiber pads are extremely efficient to work with, but increased heat is a factor that you need to mitigate when using them. So you'll also find microfiber pads tend to break down compounds faster, so you can make a few slight adjustments to respond to the characteristics. Now the Lake Country microfiber polishing pad is more of an intermediate microfiber pad, meaning that it's not as aggressive as most microfiber cutting pads, but will tend to finish better, making it quite a good single stage pad, especially on harder paints. Hopefully you guys will see that this combination and technique work quite well. I'd say removing about 90% plus of the rotary defects as well as any other defects on the paint. And it additionally finished almost perfectly with perhaps just a fraction of haze in the finish. Now in my experience, unless a paint is relatively hard, it's virtually impossible to finish this well using a microfiber pad. Add to that although the rotary holograms and compounding swirls were pretty bad, they're still moderate defects at best, and it did take a little more cut to entirely remove them, yet still left a hint of haze in the finish. So basically all of this points to the paint perhaps not being rock hard, but definitely on the harder side of the scale. Now when dealing with a lot of haze or micro marring in the finish of your combination, it's hard to address that with just technique. So you will tend to have to look at a second finishing stage or look at another combination of pad and polish as a one-step process. But when dealing with very minimal haze like this, you can in many cases eliminate it with just a good technique geared towards improving the finishing ability of your combination. So things like further reducing heat by using less pressure and even using less polish on your pad with slightly quicker arm movements may reduce cut, but will tend to improve the finishing ability of most combinations on most paint types. So I completed a larger section of the bonnet using my technique towards finishing a little better, which you'll hopefully see did work out rather well. Now I'd say there was still just the smallest hint of haze in the finish, but that's just being fussy, which most of the time that's what I'm paid to do with my high-end work. But on a quicker job like this, it's a fantastic result, removing at least 90% of the defects and still creating a far better finish than the current condition of the paint. Another thing I wanted to show in this video is that rotaries and holograms don't have to go hand in hand. When I started detailing, there was no DA polishers, So the only two options anyone using a Rotary had were to learn how to finish hologram free or not to care about it and leave your psychedelic hologram marks on the paint. As I mentioned earlier, it's normal and sometimes even beneficial to create some holograms on the paint while you're cutting defects out with a Rotary. So you can use a slightly more aggressive technique by angling your pads on the paint, using more pressure and higher speeds to cut in a more effective manner. But you have to accept that those techniques will create holograms on the paint. And although it does take a little practice, you can finish perfectly with a Rotary by using an appropriate pad and polish combination, minimal product, slowing your machine speed right down, making sure your pad stays perfectly flat with the panel, and easing off pressure. That's how you finish hologram free with a Rotary polisher. Now there's all these wives' tales and misinformation that say things like, you can never finish as well with a dual action polisher as you can with a Rotary in the right hands. And vice versa, that a Rotary is best for cutting and a DA is far superior for finishing. Honestly guys, none of that is true. It's all about machine technique and selecting the right combinations. So a Rotary user that claims that a DA polisher can't finish as well simply hasn't taken the time to understand how to adapt their understanding of technique and combinations to maximize the finishing ability of a DA polisher. And those that say that DA polishers always finish better, likewise haven't spent the time perfecting their Rotary technique or combination selection for that tool. There's no right or wrong, better or worse, just personal preference and a willingness to relearn your skill on a different machine. But ultimately, if you can master both of them, then you add more options and possibilities to your skill set. So all I want to do here is show you guys that although a Rotary with a bad technique and combination is what created these holograms, that's so far detached from what a Rotary with a good technique and combination can do. Now as I mentioned, and you guys would have seen in part 1, there were sections of the original OEM paint that weren't polished by the body shop and had no holograms, as well as most of the left side of the vehicle that had been repainted and blended into the original paint during the repair work. So it's important when you're dealing with multiple paints or finishes to also do a test in those areas to see if your combination and technique will also work well on those different clear coats or finishes. So before moving on to finishing the bonnet, I did a quick test on the repainted door to see how well my combination would work on that aftermarket paint. I must say that I was a little surprised that on the repainted panels, the clear coats seemed to be extremely similar in hardness and sensitivity to the original OEM paint, which definitely isn't always the case. If anything, I'd say the new paint was a little harder and my combination finished even a touch better. So this was really fantastic, easy and ideal for me in the end, saving me time in not having to find a new combination. What I'll also say is that although the body shop left an atrocious finish of swirls and holograms in the finish, the paint job itself was actually quite good. The colour match was very close and definitely well blended, and the orange peel match was also close but maybe just a little flatter compared to the OEM paint. And they also refined the sanding marks almost perfectly. So it's actually such a shame that they covered up that good work with such a horrible polishing finish. Now while I continue correcting the paint by firstly completing the bonnet, which you'll hopefully see in a bit, did turn out quite well, I wanted to let you know that I purposely set myself some restrictions with this job because I wanted to show some things that you guys have asked for, such as using one machine and one pad size to polish the whole car, which is my ShineMate 15mm 5-inch DA. I also restricted my testing to one brand of compounds, which was Shine Supply, and one range of pads from Lake Country, and apart from sticking to a one-stage correction, I lastly had less than 1 day or approximately 6 hours to correct the whole car. So for those of you watching that aren't familiar with my channel, this certainly isn't the way I usually do things these days in the shop. But it's also nothing foreign to me, as I did this sort of work for many years as a mobile detailer. So with the rest of the video, I'm going to try and concentrate on discussing achieving good results with limitations and more mainstream work versus high-end work, which I hope helps some of you out. So let's talk a little more about how to simplify and find the right balance of being quick and productive, but still producing a great result when correcting paint. Firstly, it's about finding the right combination. Always do some testing, as every paint and its defects are different. So you need to find a combination that not only removes a substantial amount of the defects, but also finishes relatively well. In other words, you need to try and avoid having to do a two-step cut and polish if you want to save a substantial amount of time. Secondly, don't chase perfection. Now the paint on this car is thankfully quite forgiving to work with, and the defects aren't overly bad, so it makes a great one-step candidate. But if the paint is more sensitive and the defects are more severe, it just means you have to give a little more each way. So don't use an overly aggressive combination, as it just won't finish well enough in a one-step process, and just accept that you can't chase all the defects. And don't be too fussy about a little haze in the finish, especially if it's not all that noticeable, as in many cases a good wax sealant or coating can further address it. And using all-in-one polishers can also help manage the haze and are a great product to additionally save time. Thirdly, limit your machines. Smaller 1, 2 and 3 inch polishers are fantastic for pursuing higher levels of paint correction to really get into those tight areas, but they're also extremely time consuming to use. In my experience, a 5-inch polisher and pad is the best size for a quick single stage correction. It would simply just take too long to polish a whole car with a smaller 3-inch polisher, and although a much larger 21mm 6-inch polisher is fantastic on the larger flatter areas, the larger pad and orbital throw sizes just make it too big for the more intricate areas. I'd also say that if you're mainly going to be doing quicker one-step paint correction, a force rotation polisher like the Ripes Milli or Flex VRG are perhaps the best machines due to their smaller 5 to 8mm throws and the fact that they don't stall like free spinning DAs. Now you can certainly also use a Rotary, but if you're a little newer to paint correction and haven't quite mastered it yet, a Rotary is simply going to be more difficult to both cut and polish, especially in a single stage process. And lastly, if you're doing this professionally, don't promise more than you can deliver for your set time and budget. If you've only got one day to decontaminate, correct and protect a car, unless the vehicle is already in decent condition, it's extremely difficult to pursue a higher result within that time frame. A good result and noticeable improvement is what you should be promising, but certainly nothing close to perfection. Also understand that the worse condition the car is to begin with, the easier it is to produce a noticeable difference that the customer should be extremely happy with. But that doesn't mean it's a high-end finish where you can start to closely examine areas around tight spots, badges and trims to reveal a flawless finish, or that the larger body of the paint has 95% defect removal and the best gloss and clarity levels. It takes a lot of time to achieve that, so all I'm saying is be realistic and don't promise more than you can produce within that time frame. So how do you correct the smaller panels like pillars, wing mirrors and around badges and other trims with a larger polisher and pad? Now obviously masking some areas can help protect them from a larger pad's overreach, but otherwise a good steady hand and controlled positioning of your machine can actually achieve a decent amount of correction without making a huge mess or damaging any opposing panels and trims. Apart from that, you can always put a little polish on a microfiber cloth and do some quick hand polishing when it's just too risky or your larger polisher simply doesn't fit into certain areas. I guess what I'm trying to explain here is that you just do the best you can, except that you're probably going to have more of a cleanup to do with wiping your residue off, and that some of the tighter areas will be hard to effectively correct to a higher standard. But that's okay, because as long as you're upfront in that you're not delivering perfection or charging for perfection, and you still produce a good improved result, you've done a great job. The hard thing to accept about paint correction is that there's no real standard. There's a car body repair shop near me, and although I like the owner and he does some decent paint and repair work, his paint correction results are just terrible in my eyes. However, in his eyes, and even in the eyes of many of his customers, they think the work is fantastic. But I can even look at myself and tell you that I thought the work I was producing 25 years ago was amazing, when in reality I know that compared to the work I do today, it would be quite below par. So the lesson here is that there's a lot of leeway in what one person believes is quality paint correction compared to another. Now I'll be honest in saying that I cheated in a couple of areas like the piano black and clear plastics that I just simply couldn't get a decent finish with the microfiber pad, and I did end up doing a second stage of polishing on those softer clears with a foam pad in order to get a decent finish. But apart from that, all the other panels and trims were corrected with the same combination. I should also mention that in part 1, I pointed out some clear coat overspray on the front bumpers from the body shop. It did take a second set of passes to remove it, but apart from that, it wasn't too difficult to correct off the paint, basically using the same technique. I guess I'll end it here by saying that there's almost a freedom and a level of stress relief, at least for me, in doing this more basic level of paint correction, because I still get to deliver a great result to my client, but without having to fuss and chase every little defect, which I'll be honest in saying was kinda nice for a change. Now don't get me wrong, because there's also a real satisfaction in pursuing something closer to perfection that I also enjoy. So like I say all the time here guys, there's no right or wrong in what level of work you wish to pursue, as long as you're upfront, honest, and deliver on what you promise. If you enjoyed this video and would like to say thanks and help support future content, you can do so by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ccad, which I'll have a link to in the description box, and thank you everyone for the support so far. I hope you guys stay tuned for part 3 and the final chapter of the detail on this Hyundai Elantra, where I'll be protecting the paint and showing you guys the finished results. As always, I really hope you guys enjoyed and found this video useful. Please share it, like, comment, and subscribe to this channel to show support for this content, and I'll see you guys soon.